Good evening, everyone. This is Mellissa Thomas with Florida National News. And today is not your typical evening news rundown. Today is actually kind of a special conversation that we're going to have. Typically, we have hashtag WorkerWednesday, but one of the biggest events to rock our nation took place on Wednesday. So we have our resident analyst, Angel Perry, in the backstage waiting to join us for this conversation. And, she's our analyst. So we're going to have this conversation to break apart the events that took place, kind of help to demystify the significance of the events, the factual importance of them, and kind of where we go from here, what's going on in the aftermath and what we should expect to do next. So without further ado, I bring in the one and only Angel Perry, who is the Executive Vice President of the Communications Workers of America, Local 3108. Angel, always a pleasure.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me today.
Absolutely. So first, this was a lot to digest in the last 24 hours. So
yeah.
First, just breaking down the facts of what happened. Like, let's go over that, minus the political posturing, minus the emotionality of everything. Like, let's just break this down objectively, like kind of break down the things that happened and the motives behind them.
Oh, so, the very basics of it, if I'm not mistaken, 45 decided to have a speech right before the Electoral College vote ceremony by Congress. Now, just so everyone understands, the Electoral College votes were already certified by Constitution law by the governors of each state, and that was December 14th. That doesn't change. Once that's done, that doesn't change. This next thing that happened with Congress is a ceremony. It does give the opportunity, if there's a majority of the Senate and the House that disagrees with an electoral vote, to overturn it. But everyone usually decides on December 14th what they're going to vote for. And it was overwhelmingly, everybody accepted that there was no mass fraud enough to change the election. So Pence had a conversation with 45 the night before. 45 asked him that when you preside over this ceremony, you need to reject the votes from the 4 states. It was Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. And he had a very hard time struggling with the request and his convictions. And I do have to applaud him. Pence came through tried and true as a true American and said, listen, this is a ceremony. I oversee the ceremony. I'm the presenter of this ceremony. I acknowledge the votes. And then each congressional person of their respective states has somebody to say, this is the vote, this is what was certified. It's a ceremony. And that's what he was trying to explain to 45. And they had a falling out from rumors. That's what the rumor is. They had a falling out. So once it was confirmed that Pence was going to do his actual sworn duty and oversee the ceremony, 45's speech then geared to, we need to go to the Capitol. Now, the rally had, by mid-morning, about 40,000 for Trump supporters.
Wow.
That was a lot of people to be right there on the streets at that rally. And then they walked towards the Capitol. Now, there were some elements in the crowd that convinced people that not only was the election stolen, but this would be the time to do a coup. Now, just so people understand, a coup is you are breaking the law. It's not a legal act. You are deciding that whatever government entity is in place they are incorrect and they're not right, and you're going to overtake them. That's not a protest. That's a riot, because technically during a coup, people have weapons, they are killing people, they're destructive. So the crowd did not realize the Capitol Police were low in numbers. They just, this year, or 2020, has been very trying, and the whole DC area is just worn out from all the protests. So by the time yesterday came along, we're in 2021 now. They just
vulnerable.
They were just not prepared, because Trump protesters, when they were peaceful, all of 2020 being peaceful, they never broke anything. That's just not. They weren't ready. They weren't ready. So when they decided, hey, this is going to be our revolution to take back the government, the Congress can't do this to us. These people were very heartbroken, because they were promised that Pence would be the last saving grace to overturn the election. Now we're talking about 45,000 people, 45,000 people. That's a lot. So that emboldens people to do what they normally wouldn't. Now you have crowd mentality. The aggressors in the group are now guiding the whole body into doing something most of these people probably never even thought to do. So in their heart of hearts, they actually felt that they were doing something patriotic. But again, we've never had this before. So the rhetoric that went on through the crowds, they thought they were doing something legal. No, what they did was a federal crime. They threat to body to Congress. You're talking about Congress. These are federal level officials, and Mike Pence was in the building.
Exactly.
That's treason. That's sedition. Like,
I'm glad you said that. Like, you know what I mean?
You know, as long as it was peaceful, they were fine. But then they climbed over the barricades. Now, the timing of it, so 45 speech ended right as Congress had started the ceremony and the counting of the votes. What they wanted to stop was Pence presiding over this ceremony, because 45's idea was, this isn't a valid election, and he thought he had the power to do that, and that's not what this ceremony was about at all. This was just to do a point of record in the Congressional Library, basically. That's it. There is a tiny sliver of opportunity to overturn an electoral vote, but it takes most of Congress to agree with that. So it takes a signature from a senator and a House member, and it has to be certified ahead of time of the ceremony. Remember, I just said they would have decided if they were going to agree with the votes or not December 14th. So all that paperwork would have had already been completed before yesterday's ceremony. Which there was only one complete set done, even out of the 4 states that were contesting. Pennsylvania was the only one that actually had a senator and a House representative certify their objection to the 20 electoral college votes.
That was interesting. It was a mouthful. It was a mouthful. So before we go any further, guys, we will get a little deeper into this conversation. In the meantime, we are going to take a quick commercial break. So stay tuned.
At Duke Energy, we deliver electricity and so much more, like free home energy assessments, rebates for energy-saving improvements, payment options to help you better manage your budget, and even bill credits for helping the community use less energy. So no matter what you're doing, we can help you make better energy choices every day. It's just another way we bring power to your life. How much can you save?
All right, guys, we are back with Angel Perry, and we are continuing with the conversation. So yeah, I thought it was interesting, and this was during the wee hours now when Congress reconvened after things calmed down, and they continued the ceremony, continued with, the count for the record, and each state that came up that in which there was an objection, per the procedure, Vice President Pence had to ask them, like, is there, according to the U.S. Code, is there a signature with one representative and one senator? And for most of those states, they kept having to say, unfortunately, we do not have a signature from both. And it was just like, part of me felt like, what was the point of all of that then if you if you weren't able to ascertain the necessary signature, like why go through the trouble? I guess that was just my question. Because from a spectator standpoint, I was like, y'all looking bad right now. Like just as a layperson, I saw that and I was like, that looks bad on you though. But like, just kind of give me your thoughts on that.
So, again, the whole ceremony in itself is a point of record for the Congressional Library.
Right.
So for them to actually continue, they go down on record, each of those that objected as saying they objected to this particular electoral vote, or however many votes that was for that state. So that's all that did, is that they're saying their name, which will be in history forever.
That's what I mean. Looking bad.
That you objected.
Exactly.
But
exactly.
If there was enough constituents where they came from that felt what they were doing was the right thing, then that would be the right thing, because they are the voice of the people. So that's the other side of it. They have to take account if there was enough people in their districts that felt that way. American voters' voices do need to be heard. So that was the right thing, even if it was confusing or they didn't have the Senate and House signature to go with that certification of objection.
Got you. From that perspective, that makes sense. I got you.
Yeah.
Cool. So, I mean, let's talk about the aftermath now, because this is from last night even into this morning. Things have continued to move. Obviously, there was more of a law enforcement presence in the evening. The National Guard was finally able to be deployed, and they activated more. There was more of a police force presence.
Yeah, the night crew knows how to handle business.
clean up the streets.
The night crew was like, you know what? I know what happened in the daytime. That was the bubblegum lollipop version. It's time to get down to business. I applaud the Capitol Police. They cleaned house. They got the Capitol under control, and all of those rioters, because when you are destructive, that is a crime. You are no longer a protester. A protester is saying what they feel, whether it's right or wrong, and that's verbal, and there's no destruction. Once you cross that line into creating damage into public or private property, you are now committing a crime, whether it's public whatever, or damage to property, or threatening life, breaking and entering. There were some doors that got
broken.
It's like, what?
Smashed the windows in, all that.
So yeah, the protesters had graduated from being peaceful to being destructive, and then at that point they were thugs, thieves, rioters, criminals, and it's a federal crime, especially in the capital of the United States. So the coup that they were trying to ensue, when you don't win, you get prosecuted. You go to jail. So what people didn't realize, last I counted, there was 68 people that have been arrested so far and counting. Right. So what they do is they let people go home. So all those people traveled wherever they came from and got some good night's sleep. Oh man, that was, that was whatever they felt about it. And they had a knock on the door by noon today, a lot of them, and hauled off by the FBI and the such. So yeah, you can't threaten the lives of Congress and the vice president and think, oh, I'm just going to go to work tomorrow. That's not a thing.
Right.
In case y'all didn't know.
Precisely. And like, I'm glad you shared the FBI part of it, because like up until, in terms of the research I had been hearing up until this point, I hadn't heard that element yet. Like a lot of the media focus was on the law enforcement presence on site. So, they were asking a lot of questions as to why, the law enforcement there wasn't prepared. And actually yesterday when we were, it was yesterday when we went to cover the Orange County mayor's coronavirus update, he allowed, members of the press to ask him questions about the incident in DC.
Right, and with his wife.
Right. Mm-hmm. That was the first question out the gate. But the question that we at Florida National News presented to him was, given his experience in emergency management here in Orange County, what was his assessment of how that was handled in DC, how the riot was handled in DC? And he was as dissatisfied with it as a lot of other people were. He was saying from an emergency management standpoint, just that specific standpoint, it was a failure. And, to his point, the mayor of DC, Mayor Bowser, today during her press conference, she said the same thing. Like, this was from an emergency standpoint, like that was pretty much a failure. So what you were saying earlier, obviously these guys had been kind of stretched thin. Things were different during 2020 with the whole pandemic thing anyway. But I was as amazed as probably a lot of other people seeing the amount of folks that were banging stuff into the windows, you know what I mean? Or seeing the guys that scaled the wall. You probably saw that one photo of the guy that was climbing.
Wall, but
that was amazing.
They did a lot of damage to the building. They were taking things, spray painting people's offices. Now, you got to understand, a lot of the congressional staff, Pelosi or whoever, no matter what side of the aisle, they have Homeland Security documents. You're talking about state secrets.
Yep.
So you're breaking into a congresswoman or man's office with documents and paperwork that's supposed to protect you and the entire country. Now that's where those of us that understand all of the process and the movements of something like this, one, there was chatter about what was going to happen yesterday for about 6 months.
Right.
So we already had the congressional staff and members using the travel tunnels. They weren't on the streets. They came in and out of the Capitol through the travel tunnels.
Yep.
Okay. So then you had different access points where there was only one Capitol police officer and then unarmed on top of that. What?
Exactly. That was my question. Exactly.
What?
Yep.
Okay, if you're gonna have one person because you're short, he better be like,
Packing.
looking like Rambo. Like what happened there?
Yep, packing.
So these rioters, and they damaged property, they knocked over, paintings, statues, or whatever. Now you're talking about historical artifacts.
Yes.
So if you put it in the context of you visiting a museum and those things are priceless, that's the Capitol building. It's a museum of the history of the United States, and you're going to destroy things in the name of a coup revolution. So when they damaged all these properties, I mean, you're talking about not only state charges, local city charges, now you're talking about federal charges.
Federal.
So all the FBI is going to do is they're going to take their time. They're going to watch every piece of video.
Yes.
And they use their Big Brother software, identify your face, and come for you.
Straight up.
They got their work cut out for them, but they're okay with it. They're happy to do the work because the Federal Bureau of Investigation, that's what they do. They protect us here at home from domestic terrorists.
Precisely. That's actually the perfect point to pause. So bookmark that because we're coming right back to that. Kind of with a bit of a pushback point there. So you guys stay tuned. The conversation continues. We'll be right back.
I'm not picking it up. You pick it up.
I'm not picking it up.
Well, somebody's got to pick it up.
I'll pick it up. They're clean. 'Cause my honey's clean. Oh yeah, I'm Charmin clean. That's how I know they're clean.
Charmin Ultra Strong is woven like a washcloth and just cleans better.
Yeah, I'm Charmin clean.
The kid does have a
That's
point.
My honey's clean.
Enjoy the go with Charmin. And for an extra clean finish, try Charmin Flushable Wipes.
And we are back with Angel Perry, continuing to talk about the DC riot, which, I mean, even hearing that name, like starting to hear that this morning, I was like, whoa, like somebody already coined that. It was kind of surreal to hear that title to it. There was a previous one, I think the year was 1968 with the previous one. But yeah, just hearing that name, I was like, wow, like that's pretty surreal. But going back to your point that we just bookmarked, you were previously talking about the historical significance of the U.S. Capitol and kind of the destruction of historical artifacts. Now, one of the items of pushback could be, this is not necessarily my viewpoint, but just asking the question, like, would this be the equivalent of what the other side was saying when the Confederate statues were being destroyed? And what do you feel the difference is in context between that argument and what you're saying here in terms of what was going on in the Capitol?
So my view is going to be destruction of any public property is wrong. Like there is a process which did happen in talking about those Confederate statues for the states that really pushed for legislation to have them moved. That was the right way to do it. To actually paint them and cut them up and rip them up and knock them down, understanding the validity and the anger of, you had George Floyd, which we talked about earlier last year,
right.
Breonna Taylor, the long list of just injustices or inequities in the justice system. It's understandable, but it's still wrong. So in either case where the damage is at the Capitol and there's heightened emotions and anger there for whatever was taken or felt was taken from these particular groups, the other group, to me, it's the same thing and they're both wrong. There's legislative process. You know, the ideal of here in the United States is we talk about it, we come to an agreement of how to move forward, we pass legislation, and we all move forward together in that respect. So the minute that you waver outside of what the ideal is, that's something else. And you can't point to third world country 1 and 2 and 3. Oh, look at they doing over there, and you're impassioned to do the same thing and then feel justified. Well, those people felt justified too.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah, to me, the damage of public property is wrong, period. There's legislation process to move forward and change things, especially when there's a shift in societal feelings or nuanced ideas that have taken hold on a permanent scale.
Right. And thank you. I'm glad you broke that down because I know those will be, the two arguments on either side about that. So I'm glad you broke that down.
Yeah. Yeah, they're both wrong.
And in continuation with the point about those previous protests and, you know, kind of the terminology too, in terms of what we were hearing in the media coverage. At first, I'll be honest with you, this is just me sharing my, you know, my thoughts and reaction. At first, during the, you know, in the summer when, you know, George Floyd was murdered and the protests that broke out there, we were hearing a lot of rhetoric about, you know, these guys being terrorists, you know, the folks that were protesting because the riots had broken out. The one police precinct had been burned down, like very drastic reactions. But when I heard the word terrorist being used, at first, I'll be honest with you, I thought like, that sounds like a very harsh word to use. However, for anybody that is not aware of what the definition of a terrorist is, they actually shared that. Mayor Bowser actually shared that during her press conference earlier today, which is literally that. Like if you cause any physical damage to properties,
Right.
With the intention of causing government to change policy or to take action, that is the literal federal legal definition of terrorism. Right. So I just wanted to share that with the viewers, just in case y'all didn't know that. Absolutely. And maybe you're like me and you're kind of woke to like the media game and you heard those words being used and you were probably offended by them. Like I get it because I was offended too, but just going by law, like I understand that now. And nobody that's been commenting on the DC riot is afraid to use that word because it fits the definition. You know what I mean? Like this was a form of domestic terrorism.
When members of Congress have to use gas masks because they are literally gassing the Capitol, that is terrorism. That's a threat to life.
Exactly.
You don't know what someone's health situation is. So we had 4 people that died out of these riots.
Unfortunately.
Ashley Babbitt, who is an Air Force veteran out of San Diego. She was only 35, but she was storming a chamber.
Wow.
That was barricaded. Her and whoever she was partnering with, and a suited gentleman who was protecting whatever staff he was protecting. Now, there's been some debate whether it was a Capitol police officer or Secret Service. It was a man in a suit. He was protecting what he was doing his job, and shots fired. They were warned numerous times. His weapon was out for quite a minute or two, and they just proceeded to break glass to the private chamber area. They were at the top of the stairs. Now, when he discharged his weapon, it was simultaneous. The riot gear Capitol Police were coming up the stairs, and they announced themselves. So he then, stopped firing. But by that time, Mrs. Babbitt was hit in the neck and bled out.
There you go. I mean,
she passed
very
away.
Unfortunate.
She believed what she
believed it,
and she died for it. So it's very unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. It's understandable on both sides, but it's very unfortunate. It was a justified shooting. There was no. You can't break into the congressional chambers and think that no one's going to protect Congress. Like, what?
Right.
And she knew better. That's the thing. Like, as a veteran, especially if you had a career out of it, you weren't just in for a couple of years, you know better. So that was a very conscious decision on her part. She believed she was doing the right thing for her side of her political views. But again, here in the United States, we go through legislation when you don't agree on policy. We don't attack people.
Right. That's usually the thing that makes the difference and kind of what's helped the U.S. Republic, like the system, last much longer than than a lot of other nations. And then I want to say there was a podcast I was listening to called Women of Impact. It's a interview series, and Dia Sims, who is the president of Combs Enterprises, she was talking with the host, and she had a conversation with somebody. This was back during the George Floyd situation. So they were having that conversation about what we should be doing going forward, how we can better understand each other. So here's why I'm bringing this up. She had a previous conversation with somebody who was a bit older and not from the US, I don't believe. But the person said, one thing you have to remember is compared to a lot of other nations, the US is still pretty young. Like the US is only like 247 years old. I could be wrong. Feel free to correct that. But still relatively young for a nation. And the Republic has lasted very long, has been stable for a very long time because of the system that is in place. You know what I mean? Going back to the point you were just making about, the way legislative issues are resolved, what I mean? Through that discourse, through disagreement, through the century-long filibuster. You know what I mean? I always feel bad for the Senate when they do that. I'm just like, oh, that's a long time to stay away. Like,
right.
But they get results. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Not always the results they necessarily want fully, but results. You know what I mean? On either side, either nothing happens, like one side sticks to their guns, or the other side does make headway and there's change made.
It's the art of conversation. You have to be able to articulate, and the ones that have gotten very good at understanding and assessing a whole situation. Now, for a lot of members of Congress, Senate and in the House, they only see their side and they will say, well, this is this and that is that, and that's why we got to do it this way. Smart ones will assess why someone thinks different and have that ongoing conversation weeks or months before a bill will hit committee, so that they have a way to articulate why people should vote for a bill when it finally gets to the floor, once it leaves committee and goes to a floor. Those are the ones that get this country moving forward. Is you need to be able to assess and listen and understand why someone thinks different from you, why someone's experience is different from you, and then why your policy and the way you see something is actually a benefit to both. It can't be just the benefit from what you see and what your view is. You have to encompass the other person, other people, their experiences, and why your policy is going to benefit everyone. And those are the ones that are successful and move this country forward.
Perfect point for a last commercial break. So when we come back, guys, we're gonna follow in that vein of what Angel's talking about and kind of go more towards how to go forward now. Like after everything that happened yesterday, it's like, okay, what now? So stick around, guys. We're gonna have one last commercial break and wrap up. Stay tuned.
We wanted to move back home to be closer to his family. We decided to go with pods because things were stressful enough.
We weren't sure how long we were going to need storage for, so we needed something that was flexible, and then they can deliver the container to wherever we move to.
We haven't found the perfect house yet, but we're still looking.
And we are back. So yeah, after based on what we were just talking about going into the break, we saw, interestingly, like a lot of the members of the GOP start to finally break ranks with the president. Like this was where the line is drawn. Like we cannot support this. And there were talks of, key members in the cabinet, going to resign, things like that.
Today too.
Right. Folks chose to go.
They was
chose to go.
What? you think this was okay? They're special people. I quit.
Right. And we didn't even really talk about that yet, but just, the president saying that in his video address to dissuade the folks, like tell them to leave. He said, go home. We love you. You're special. Okay. What? I just had to ask that question. I had to ask you that question. I'm like, huh?
You're different. You're appreciated. Thank you. Because when you say someone's special, it's a thank you.
We love you.
Yeah. I support you. Power to the people.
Yeah, that left a huge question mark for me. And I mean, obviously this is nothing new or different with the president. We saw bits of this in Charlottesville, the whole thing about they're good people on both sides.
Fine people
Very fine people on both sides. Thank you. Yeah. And while I understand everyone's First Amendment rights, there's a line. There's a line.
Well,
you know what I mean? And
the line is the second that you're trying to incite violence, that's no longer an opinion.
Right.
Now you are a conspirator to crimes.
Right. And in this case in DC, the line that they crossed there was the physical destruction. Like when they started to cause the damage, trying to break in the building, that crossed over into criminal territory. Yeah. So given the law and the fact that a law was broken, and you as several laws were broken, and you as the head of the nation says, we love you, that's an odd message for that large amount of people committing crimes.
The devil's advocate, moms love their murderous sons and daughters.
With the face, she's like, I got that.
Oh, my kids, as they hold off to jail for murdering 20 people. So, I guess that's the same thing. He loved them.
I couldn't believe it. So, going back to, what we were talking about at the beginning of this segment here, going forward, we saw kind of the breaking of the ranks with, other members of the GOP. A lot of them had, scathing speeches last night.
Beautiful speeches. McConnell,
right?
Graham,
Romney.
I love Mitch Romney. They beautifully impassioned. Like, you saw the spark that drove them to run for office and swear in, and to accredit each and every member of Congress to walk back into that Capitol building to do your duty, including Mike Pence. Like, I really wasn't a fan of his until last night. Mm-hmm. Yesterday, and then leaving, because, the Capitol could have been attacked. It could have been completely bombed. There was weapons found. There was a long rifle, bombs, and a few cocktails that were found. That was what was found, and that was what was released to the public. We don't know the extent of how bad it really was. And so for which each member of Congress to come back to work, to complete the task as the Constitution is written for them to do, was the most beautiful thing I saw ever in my lifetime. I had a new respect for all of them, even the ones that aren't my favorites. I have to, those that I see that represent her here in Florida, I'll have to thank each of one of them wholeheartedly. It was just beautiful. I stayed up until 4 a.m. and watched all of it. It was just beautiful.
Precisely. So going forward, let me get your thoughts on this. Obviously, an event like this rattled a lot of people. into changing their minds, because I want to say the report was that there were going to be 14 GOP members in the Senate, I believe, that were going to voice their opposition, in the ceremony, if you will. And then that number, after the incident, that number dropped down to about 4 or something like that.
It was 6.
It was 6. So obviously in the immediate, short term, things shifted, things changed. But do you think that there's going to be a longer term change now after an event like this? Like what? Okay, kind of elaborate.
So I'm very confident going forward. There will be legislation to shore up those gaps, not only with the individual election process at each state. We don't want a universal process. That would be too easy to tamper with, or for it to actually be manipulated. So we never want a universal process for all 50 states to have an election the way they do an election. It needs to be individual to each state. But there will be, going forward, legislation at state level and federal level to address the gaps that were exposed to COVID. I mean, there's a lot that we just never thought about because there was no pandemic to force us to look at these gaps, and now there is.
Very true.
People have discovered their lack of civic knowledge.
Right.
I've taught it for going on 5 years now, and I applaud those that wake up and want to know their civic process. You have to do more than vote. You have to know who your elected officials are. You need to be reaching out to them, email, call their office, get involved. Like, why are you just burying your head in work? Oh, I'm going on vacation, or I've got this, I've got that. What happens at your state capital and at the capital of this country affects you directly. Why wouldn't you want to know what's going on? Why wouldn't you tell your elected officials what you need from them? Leaving them to do and guess what you need is how we got here today. This is exactly how we got here today. And the fact that people don't know how votes and ballots are counted or certified, like, there's more than half of the country that didn't know any of this process.
Right.
And that was ignorance on purpose. You out there, American people, chose not to know. And then now that this has came up and someone can tell you this is fraud and that is fraud, and you can't validate it because you don't know where to start. There's more than 100 conversations I've had with people that then reached out to me and wanted to know the process. And I was happy to sit on the phone with each and every of those people, that wherever their knowledge stopped, I was filling in the gaps. I was more than happy to have those conversations. But it shouldn't take this election, and as shocking and disruptive as it was, but maybe it was something we needed.
Right.
Maybe something we needed because people were complacent. They're not anymore.
Right.
I'm very proud about that. It's a brand new day. We have to be grateful that people have woken up and now they want to know what the process is. They want to know who their elected officials are. They want to know how to get involved. So, this last election cycle, we had hundreds of people that had never registered to vote before, registered to vote. And then they're sharing it with their families. We had grandmas that never voted before and been, here in this country decades, and the first time they voted this election cycle. We had 18-year-olds that just turned 18, and because everything that was happening, they like, well, how do I get involved? It was a beautiful thing. I could tell you what, I've done this a few years now, and this is the first election cycle where so many people wanted to know. They wanted answers, and it was beautiful.
Very well said. That's actually the perfect place to wrap up. So Ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching this, don't let the conversation end with us. Leave your comments below. Let us know your thoughts on it. We'd love to, jump in the comments with you and, have, kind of join that conversation with you. And hey, you know what I mean? Let us know. Either side. Doesn't matter. You know what I mean? We're nonpartisan over here. So, feel free to let us know your thoughts on what's going on, what you think the president should be doing right now, what you think we as citizens should be doing right now, what you feel should happen next. All right. Angel is here. I'm here. We appreciate you guys for tuning in as always. And be sure you guys to take care of yourselves, continue to stay safe, because even with everything that is going on, even though we had this big thing on Wednesday, this crazy riot in DC, the pandemic is still here. Okay. Please continue to stay safe. Please wear your mask. Please practice social distancing. And continue to stay safe. Keep in touch with your loved ones. You never know what may happen. Unfortunately, that veteran lost her life in the DC riot. So please be sure to be careful and stay safe. All right, guys, take care.
All right.